Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is my pleasure to serve as the moderator for this panel discussion on renewable microgrids and their role in the sustainable energy transition for island states. I am Isel Francis, an Island Innovation Ambassador from Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm super excited to be here and be a part of this conversation as an islander, an energy policy analyst, a researcher, and a consultant. So before we get started, we want to get to know you, our audience. So we are going to have a poll. Tell us which region you're from so that we can get a sense of who's in the room. And then also answer, to what extent do you see renewable energy microgrids playing a role for islands? We want to know if you think that it's a major role, a minor role, a critical role, or if you think that it plays no role at all. So while you're answering the poll, let's get some logistics out of the way. So one of the key objectives for the Virtual Island Summit is to provide free access to world-class experts and to facilitate the sharing of a diverse range of viewpoints from islanders from around the world to share ideas, good practices, and solutions. This is only possible with you, the audience, being super engaged and asking questions. So you're invited and encouraged to ask questions in the question and answer box, and to identify yourself with your name and your country and indicate if the question is specifically addressed to one of our panelists. Please also note that this session is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And lastly, if you have any comments in the chat, remember to change it to submit to all panelists and attendees, as the drop box automatically defaults to all panelists when we're in Zoom. So let's see. So moving right along to why we're really here. The goal of this session is to explore how renewable energy implemented in microgrids such as islands can lead to sustainable development with a substantial cut in carbon dioxide emissions, a lower price of electricity, as well as a reinforcement of energy independence through decreased fossil fuel imports. So why is this an important and pressing issue that we need to discuss and solve? Well, put simply, the livelihoods of families and individuals living on islands across the globe are directly tied to this availability and price of one volatile global commodity, oil. So islands are disproportionately dependent on imported fossil fuels for our well-being. Dominates our transportation sectors, our tourism industry, and powers the electricity system in most of our islands. So there's lots of risks and drawbacks with a predominant fossil fuel-based energy sector. And that paired with continuing cost reductions in solar, wind, and energy storage technologies suggests that an alternative to islands and remote communities across the globe is affordable renewable energy and the use of renewable microgrids. With this background, I'm honored to be joined by a panel of experts who are going to discuss the role of renewable microgrids in our sustainable energy transition for small islands. We'll first hear from Ambassador Solomaro, who serves as the Secretary General of the Pacific Island Development Forum. Ambassador Mara, over to you.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Moderator, fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to you from the Pacific. I'm given this opportunity to make a few remarks at this important session on renewable microgrids and its positive impacts for islands. I also wish to convey my sincere appreciation to Island Innovation for organizing this important event and the invitation to participate. And I do hope that in sharing information and best practices, we will be contributing positively to the building of resilient, sustainable, and prosperous islands worldwide. At the outset, I would like to state that Pacific Island leaders have made the transition to renewable energy a development priority for the region. And on the PIDF platform, this is part of our much bigger agenda of transitioning our member states into blue and green economies. And it makes a lot of socio-economic sense. The costs of renewable energy technology and materials are now affordable, particularly with China's entry into the renewable energy market. And in a region with an abundance of sunshine, the Pacific has a lot of reliable sources of renewable energy in the sun, water, and wind. Renewable microgrids is therefore the obvious answer to a number of structural challenges and geophysical constraints that often hinder the implementation and progress of sustainable development in small island developing states. The four main challenges I wish to highlight here are: one, geographic isolation. Small island developing states are often located far from the major source markets of fossil fuel and other production sectors, which inevitably make the cost of transportation and related expense quite high. And this has a spiraling effect on the cost of services and other commodities manufactured locally. Unfortunately for the Pacific, electricity production accounts for roughly 40% of petroleum or fossil fuel use in the region. The long-term dependence on diesel generation, where the cost of fuel alone is typically at least 20 to 30 US cents, has meant kilowatts meant that the cost of electricity has remained among the highest in the world. The second is economic vulnerability. Small island developing states' economies constitute of small domestic markets and a relatively small manufacturing base. And relying on a narrow natural resource base thus makes it for an undiversified economy. This limits achieving economies of scale and reduce scope for private sector development, with attendant impacts on economic growth and job creation. Since economies are also highly open and thus are prone to the volatility of global trade and financial markets and economic downturns. The infrastructure costs, particularly for sustainable energy, communications, and transport, are also relatively high for small island states. The third is social vulnerability. The rapid population growth in most small island developing states creates socioeconomic stress for the provision of basic services and infrastructure. The islands are often scattered over a wide area of ocean, which affect the ability of governments to deliver public services due to its relative costs. Urban migration then becomes an inevitable option for those seeking better public services. But as you know, this then creates its own sets of socioeconomic problems for governments in the urban areas. The fourth is environment vulnerability. This is often characterized by fragile natural environments such as threatened biodiversity, stress on water supply, land management challenges, and so on. But small island developing states are particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, like extreme weather events, sea level rise, coastal erosion, and habitat degradation. Many small island developing states have yet to build sufficient resilience to deal with these increasing incidences of natural disasters. And this creates a lot of uncertainties for island governments. And to many, the only certainty for them is that these threats will intensify in the future. We in the Pacific Islands have been experiencing a lot of these natural hazard losses recently, and now with greater frequency and intensity. In just the last decades, Pacific small island developing states have experienced natural hazard losses that in any single year, according to the World Bank, have approached and in some cases exceeded the gross domestic product of our own countries. And our islands' vulnerabilities have been worsened by the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. We are facing the most severe economic recession in history with long-lasting repercussions for communities, business, and governments. Against the backdrops of these challenges, countries and territories across the Pacific are further handicapped in the area of sustainable energy by one, limited range of indigenous energy resources, two, the high cost of developing energy resources and extending services to remote populations, three, poor quality of energy data and trends, a small base of skilled people to address the issues, and a weak bargaining positions with petroleum producing suppliers. Furthermore, access to electricity varies significantly in the Pacific. For example, nearly all the households in Niue, Nauru, Palau, Tokelau, Cook Islands, Samoa, Tonga, and Tuvalu have electricity access. But in the more populous islands of Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, and Solomon Islands, overall electrification rates remain very low at about 20% of households or less. However, low-income households in all Pacific Island countries use little electricity because of its high costs, even though this can be easily accessed. This is true for homes in informal settlements in urban areas. Pacific Island governments also find themselves subsidizing energy consumers on the main grid systems to mitigate these high costs. So retail electricity tariffs in the region are among the highest in the world. The high tariffs mean that there is significant scope for renewable energy to deliver tariff reductions and improve the commercial viability of investments in renewable energy-based power generation. Overall, there is a strong support for renewable energy in the Pacific because of the need to address climate change and energy security and to address high electricity costs. But there is significant variation in the legal, policy, and regulatory environment for renewable energy. In general, the absence of a strong institutional setup, effective regulatory frameworks, and effective policies and incentives are regarded as key obstacles. The emergence of solar panels as an alternative solution across much of the Pacific is therefore apparent. Dramatic price reductions for solar panels over the past 10 years has brought the cost of solar generated electricity down to the point where it is now competitive with most forms of commercial generation, which is particularly true for those grids where generation is mostly by diesel engines, as in the case of most Pacific Island countries. Currently, most Pacific Island countries have a few relatively large PV plants feeding electricity into the main island grids. Some of these are owned and operated by the state-owned power utilities, but some are financed, owned, and operated by private sector independent power producers. As a way forward, solar energy is a modular technology that can be deployed on and off grid in its small standalone system, which offers the potential to preempt a shift from privatization and centralization associated with fossil fuels energy production to decentralized and community-owned assets. Many Pacific small island developing states also adopt off-grid solar energy solutions, such as standalone solar home system and mini microgrids, to mitigate the difficulty of extending the electricity grids to hundreds of scattered islands. The Department of Energy and the Ministry of Rural Development of Solomon Islands have been carrying out solar home systems program that has provided electricity to 40% of the total number of households in the country. The government of Kiribati has also an ongoing solar home system program which provides electricity to over 5,000 households in its outer islands. The rural electrification project implemented by the Department of Energy of Vanuatu also aims to provide solar home system to 85% of the dispersed off-grid households. Currently, 96% of the population in Fiji has access to electricity, of which 25% uses solar home systems. At the PIDF, we are supporting this effort by promoting a multi-stakeholder and an all-of-society participatory approach to the development of renewable energy in our member states. Currently, we are rolling out the solarizations of head of states for Pacific Islands leaders' residences, where each system installed becomes a demonstration project of this multi-stakeholder approach involving the private sector and civil societies to inspire the mass adoption of solar energy and other renewable energy technologies in member countries. Another such initiative is the capacity building to strengthen sustainable implementation of renewable energy. The goal of this project is to contribute to increased energy access and reduction of carbon emissions through sustainable use of natural resources and renewable energy technologies in rural areas of Fiji, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea. There are various actors currently focused in this area in the Pacific who all work to support the development of the regional framework for energy security and resilience in the Pacific. The focus of the 2021-2030 framework is to help the Pacific Island countries and territories address their own energy sector priorities with a strong emphasis on improved energy sector resilience to adverse climate change and natural disasters. Recently, the region has tried to embrace the private sector as a provider of utility services, including increased rural energy access. However, various attempts to get the private sector involved in supply of energy and electricity have not fully materialized owing to a number of reasons, include the lack of innovative energy policies and the gap between policy development and implementation, perception of high sovereign risk among potential investors, the lack of effective legal regulatory structure, the absence of national strategies to promote private sector development, amongst others. Historically, a considerable number of energy projects have been funded under various donor programs. Of the private sector involvement was at least mentioned as an objective of these interventions. However, independent evaluations of these initiatives have often found that results were disappointing. Often it comes down to the failure to recognize that in the long run, private investors need at least to cover their opportunity costs and secure a fair return on their investment. A particular challenge in Pacific small island developing states is that the vulnerability and special characteristics of small states and weak capacity in the private sector contribute to perceived riskiness and difficulty in attracting private investment inflows. In conclusion, I can say that despite the many challenges to building sustainable renewable energy in island communities, we in the Pacific are working with a wide range of our partners, development partners, to take advantage of the availability of small grid solar and hydro units that can provide standalone sources of electricity to rural and isolated island communities. It is especially important now in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and the green growth recovery that is being planned to mitigate its effect on education, health, and other social services in our island communities. Yes, developing renewable microgrids can reduce persistent vulnerabilities and build resilience in island communities. And we look forward to this being supported in the future. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Amar. That was an incredible opening keynote, and truly a lot of your points were very salient and sets the stage perfectly for our next speaker. As you mentioned, multi-stakeholder and an all-of-society approach to renewable energy development and the importance of partnerships. It gives me great pleasure to turn to our sponsor for today's session, Alexi Shallow, who serves as the Islands and Microgrids Director of EDF Renewables, bringing in our private sector and emphasizing again the importance of partnerships. Alexi, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for this opening keynote. Let me share my screen. I have prepared a few slides to make my speech easier to understand. Here we go. My message is my main message is very easy and completely in line with the opening keynote of Mr. Ambassador. we should all consider energy transition on island as a priority. Not only because people living on island are specifically worried by climate change consequences, as it was said by Mr. Ambassador, but essentially because more than 90% of the generated power on island come from fossil fuel, mostly from diesel. We all know that diesel generators are the most CO2 emitting power plants. It's then easy to understand that a renewable project on island will offset diesel usage and avoid more CO2 emission than any other renewable project.
Alexi, apologize to interrupt. Would you mind putting your PowerPoint in presentation mode?
No problem.
Wonderful. Thank you.
That's better?
Perfect. Please continue.
So you may ask, who is EDF? EDF is a key international player of the energy transition. I'm proud to say that 90% of its generated power is carbon-free. EDF is a very large power utility present in more than 30 countries worldwide. In fact, EDF is the second biggest power utility in the world with 120 gigawatts of installed capacity. EDF is not only a power producer. EDF also operates distribution network. And within EDF, there is a subsidiary 100% owned by EDF, focusing only on renewable energy project. This is EDF Renewables, my company. EDF Renewables is an integrated renewable energy operator. That means that we can handle a renewable energy project from A to Z. We develop, we finance, we build, and we operate. With 14 gigawatts of solar and wind facilities in operation and 2 gigawatt-hour battery storage projects secured, EDF Renewables is a world leader IPP, independent power producer. To better understand our unique expertise in renewable projects in remote territories, you need to know that EDF is already in charge of the power grid of a dozen of islands. More than 1 million customers currently live on these islands where more than 2 gigawatts of power facilities are installed. By targeting 100% renewable energy in these territories, EDF has acquired all the necessary skills to pursue the energy transition on other islands. You may ask, what is a microgrid? A microgrid is a power grid not connected to the main grid. For example, an island with no submarine cable linked to the continent is typically a microgrid. A renewable microgrid will be composed of renewable energy facilities, large battery systems, and usually diesel generators. Diesel generators are very expensive to operate, not only because of the very volatile diesel price, but also because of their very high operating and maintenance costs. So please keep in mind that today, price of renewables has become more attractive than diesel. The selling price of a renewable power purchase agreement can be up to twice less expensive, including the battery services. Everyone knows that battery systems enable to use solar energy after the sunset, but it is also a key element for the network stability and the resilience of the microgrid. As demonstrated on Saint, a French island not connected to the national grid, the microgrid perfectly works during part of the year when the genset is completely off. Within EDF Renewable, my team is 100% dedicated to renewable hybrid projects in remote areas such as deserts and islands. On the desert side, EDF Renewable has commissioned this year a 100 megawatt solar plus 140 megawatt-hour battery project in the US. On the island side, EDF Renewable has been selected as preferred bidder for a tender in a Pacific island. Our proposal is to offset 80% of the diesel power generation by renewable energy. This project will avoid 2 million tons of CO2 emission, cut the cost of energy over 20%, reduce fuel dependency of the country. Our client won't have to invest a single dollar as EDF Renewable will finance the project and sell the generated power on a dollar per megawatt hour basis at a fixed price during 30 years. From this presentation, you need to remember 3 simple things. You could benefit from a lower and fixed power price, plus a reduction of your CO2 emission. EDF Renewable has all the necessary skills to optimize your energy mix at a better price. And you won't have to invest, as EDF Renewable will do it, and then just sell the generated power to your national power utility. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexi. That was an amazing presentation. One of the key barriers to renewable energy development in small island developing states is that idea of finance and the ability to finance such projects. So it's really important for the private sector and companies such as EDF to play that major role, being that financier, and that point, a key takeaway from your presentation is duly noted. Next up, we have Dr. Cletus Burton, who serves as the Executive Director of the Caribbean Association of Electric Utilities, or CARELEC. Dr. Burton?
Thank you, Azel, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon to participants in different time zones all over the world. Thank you so much for having CARELEC represented on this esteemed panel. Greetings from the Caribbean to delegates from across the globe. I would just like to say a few introductory remarks about CARELEC and what we are and what we do, and then share some thoughts from mainly our position papers on energy transition, which will set some introductory context for our contribution to this panel discussion. So first of all, for those who may not be aware, CARELEC is the Caribbean Electric Utility Association Services Corporation. We undergo a major repositioning about 3 years ago with the development of a strategic plan for 2018 to 2022, which saw a repositioning of the organization from an association of electric utilities to an association of electric energy solution providers. And that was really a significant departure and pivot from the 31 years of operation of the entity to a greater focus, a broadening of the tent, as it were. And for example, including for the first time in a formal way, creating a distinct category of membership for independent power producers, of whom we presently have 8 independent power producers in membership. The association comprises 32 electric utilities from across the Caribbean region, which incidentally includes EDF Martinique and Guadeloupe as long-standing members of CARELEC. We also include members from the Dutch Caribbean, Dutch Antilles, as I said, the French Antilles, and the English-speaking Caribbean as well. We also have in membership 60 associate members, which would be companies, manufacturers, providers of supplies and component parts, generators, transistors, etc., from across the world, and 10 affiliate members, which comprises training organizations, management consulting firms, research organizations, academic institutions, and also, interestingly, the Edison Electric Institute, which itself is a major association of investor-owned utilities in North America and globally. So in membership, in summary, CARELEC has 110 members comprising electric utilities across 3 languages in the Caribbean, and also IPPs, associate members, and affiliate members. We, of course, have very robust collaborative arrangements with other regional associations, organizations, not only in the energy sector, I might add, but also in the telecom sector, public health with CARTHA, disaster emergency management, CDEMA, and our mandate would span all of these various interactions. So a warm welcome to all of you participants and greetings from, again, the membership of CARELEC. On the question of microgrids, it has well been defined and established, and Ambassador Mara, again, in his outline of the challenges, I think speaks for the Caribbean region as well as the Pacific, as he did the 4 areas of geographic isolation, economic vulnerability, social vulnerability, environmental vulnerability, all were very well in place for the Caribbean region as well as the Pacific region. So the context has been set. Alexis, in his definition of microgrids and the work that EDF is doing internationally and in the Caribbean, also set the tone for some of what I would have said, which I will forego. So microgrids, in terms of decentralized electric generation and distribution, can, we believe, significantly contribute to increase the security of supply and grid resilience in the Caribbean countries. And we believe that that will clearly allow for a higher share of renewable energy in local power systems, especially we should note during hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, as we've seen recently in the island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, floods and other natural disasters. We believe the decentralization of power generation and distribution would clearly allow for non-affected parts of the grid to continue to operate and for electricity supply and to have a greater level of resilience in the social and economic life of the people of the region. We believe, though, that the approach to the implementation of microgrids in the region is somewhat different to larger power markets due to 2 main factors. Again, as already alluded to, the lack of interconnection with other power markets, being that for the most part, we operate on islands where there's this disconnect and we do not have regional power markets and no interconnectivity with power markets outside specific jurisdictions in the region, except, for example, in a member territory like Belize that has imported arrangements from Mexico to the extent of about 50% of their capacity. That obviously is not possible, or not yet feasible, I should say. It is possible, but perhaps not quite feasible in terms of interconnection between the islands. Has been looked at, but to date has not yet been deemed to be economically feasible. And so the lack of interconnection with other power markets and also the limited economies of scale, again, given the scope of our operations, and thirdly, the prevailing single buyer markets would basically, we believe, necessitate a slightly different approach. So we believe that the planning of microgrids to increase grid resilience should be done by or in close coordination with the incumbent utilities or network operators because of the following reasons. We believe that the cost efficiency of RE expansion, the cost efficiency is a critical success factor in the Caribbean especially, where again, we met the point that there's limited economies of scale and transport costs increase in the levelized cost of electricity of renewable energy projects in particular. And so we believe that the additional cost for grid expansion should be carefully weighed against other and complementary alternatives such as underground cabling or even indeed the price of maintaining the status quo. So the reliability of the respective distributed energy resources should be considered when planning microgrid, electricity generation and distribution. And we're looking at specifically PV with battery storage or other available resources like hydropower in some territories. So it should be noted that several microgrid deployments have already been done successfully in the region, in the Caribbean region, in different scales, from microgrids on the islands of minute deployments to larger microgrids, for example, hydro plants in the island of St. Vincent. So the planning of renewable energy of expansion within the development of an integrated resource and resiliency plan should build on decentralization and looking at the specific characteristics of the Caribbean region, which we have articulated in at least 2 position papers that we've recently updated and would elaborate a bit further in the discussion. So I thank you for your time at this stage. I will end for now and engage in further discussion on this in the question and answer session and in response to some of the other contributions. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burton. Certainly, the IRRP and resilience is an integral part of this idea of a sustainable energy transformation. And that's a theme that has come up in the keynote by Ambassador Mara, again in Alexi's presentation, and yet again with yours. We turn our attention to Maikolasi Funua, who serves as the acting CEO of Tonga Power Limited. Thank you again, Dr. Burton, and over to you, Mr. Funua. Maikolasi, did we lose you?
Sorry about that.
Awesome.
As well, I was having a few connection troubles there. My sincere apologies, and may I thank everybody for their patience as we grapple with some of the connection issues on this side. It's an honor and a privilege to be part of this panel, and very interested in the discussion and the presentation so far by the Honorable Ambassador Mara, as well as my esteemed colleagues that are part of the panel today. As Al had mentioned, my name is Maikolasi Funua. I'm the acting CEO for Tonga Power Limited. Tonga Power Limited is a vertically integrated public enterprise here in the Kingdom of Tonga with a customer base of 25,000 customers. We conduct our business across 4 of the 36 inhabited islands of the Kingdom of Tonga. We are 11 years young in terms of a state-owned public enterprise. We have a long history, however, in terms of electricity generation here in the Kingdom of Tonga. We are also 100% supportive of the Kingdom of Tonga's goals for introduction of renewable energy by various means. The goal was for 50% renewable energy by the year 2020. Unfortunately, with COVID-19, we have not been unable to achieve that target. We have shifted that target to 2025 to be closely followed by a 70% renewable energy target by the year 2030. And also we intend as a nation to continue along the renewable energy journey towards 100% renewable energy by the year 2035. This is on a reasonably sized grid. As some may know, the Kingdom of Tonga would be classified as a medium-sized utility here in terms of the context of the Pacific Islands. We have a peak demand on our main island of electricity generation of around 11 megawatts. And we have a reasonable amount so far of renewable energy, generating about 13% of our electricity from renewable energy, mainly solar, but also a small contribution from wind energy thus far in our journey towards renewable energy. At the moment, we have a number of projects underway. We hope to be introducing an additional 6 megawatts of solar over the next couple of months, as well as a sizable amount of electricity storage, around about 20 megawatt hours and 10 megawatts in capacity of battery energy storage systems within the next couple of months. So, although a bit delayed due to the intervention of COVID-19, we are well and truly continuing our journey towards renewable energy here in the Kingdom of Tonga, supported quite well by the government and their policies and objectives for reducing the dependence on imported fossil fuels, as well as providing a statement in terms of reduction of the impacts of climate change, as well as to focus on providing affordability gains to the people of the country. We here in the Kingdom of Tonga have well and truly gone down the path of microgrids and are continuing to understand the challenges of decentralization as well as digitization as it comes to the introduction of renewable energy. And the goals of decarbonization of our economy. From the business perspective, there are various institutional and regulatory challenges that continue to be faced by us as a public enterprise. And I do hope to emphasize a little bit the business approach in terms of considering the cultural as well as the strategic change that needs to be implemented from the power utility in order to realize the benefits that are undeniable from the microgrid transformation and the introduction of renewable energy into the economy. As many are aware, the electricity industry has been for many years built on the concept of commodity-based profit, as well as establishing resources and processes around the establishment of a commodity-based utility. So that's the key transformation from an institutional perspective that we continue to move towards in line with the introduction of renewable energy, changing our profit formula to be more service-based, and upskilling of our resources to be more focused on sustainable solutions and less focused on the commodity basis, but also essential in terms of linking all those two facets together is the changes in terms of our key processes. In saying that, we have developed significant and reasonable changes along the pathway that we have come along in terms of these key processes. We are currently investigating to see what options are available from the market towards the 2030 target at the moment, and looking for IPP partners to assist us in terms of our transition to higher levels of renewable energy. So in recent times, we have put an expression of interest to the market to assist us in terms of our model of using IPPs towards achieving the renewable energy and sustainable energy targets that we have. So in summary, absolutely 100% in line with the discussion that has been had so far in supporting the transition to microgrids. But as I mentioned, from a business perspective, there are some significant challenges to also continue to keep everybody on their feet in terms of the transition. And I'm sure that as per most that are listening, they are very well aware of those challenges, and we look forward to continuing to work together with various partners from the Pacific and from the development partners. And we are also very happy that Islan Innovation are establishing these forums for further discussion of these challenges and ways that we can collaborate and work together to address those. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicolasi. It's often very encouraging to hear directly from utility leaders about the importance of a sustainable transition, and also his incorporation of the importance of culture in the business model. So that was a really refreshing remark. So again, thank you, Nicolasi. And last but certainly not least on our expert panel today is Abraham Simpson. He serves as the Sustainable Energy Development Project Implementation Officer of the Pacific Power Association. Abraham, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Can you just confirm you're hearing me and you can see the slides?
We can definitely hear you, and your slides just need to be turned into full screen. It's still in, we need to put it in presentation mode, please.
Okay, yeah, I'm doing that. All right, can you see that?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm here on behalf of the Pacific Power Association. They are the sister organization to CARICOM in the Caribbeans. We have about a membership of around 26 utilities, the largest being Papua New Guinea and the Pacific, and a lot of the small islands are members, and about 90 and almost 100 affiliate members. I managed the World Bank funded Sustainable Energy Development Project for the Pacific Power Association. And I was asked on behalf of the acting executive director to participate. This slide, these are the ADB developing member countries. Just to give you an overview, the population, the land area, and the geography. And you can see there are many, many islands comprising a state. And this is the challenge we have. A lot of islands scattered throughout the Pacific Ocean. Remote, many of them, and long supply chains. In terms of energy, this is the total energy for these states. Now, I haven't included the French territories and the American US territories here for this presentation. In terms of the renewable energy component, you will notice the largest component, the utilities having the largest component of renewable energies are Papua New Guinea and Fiji and Samoa, because these have significant hydro resources. The smaller islands mostly have solar is the only option for renewable energy. On the bottom graph, you can see the contribution from each of the islands. And so all the countries and the utilities in line with the state's goal aggressively working on a strategy to replace diesel, fossil fuel energy generated. This is a slide showing access, and I just put in 2018 to 2020. Some data are missing in between, but these are the utilities that we have. From American Samoa, most of them are quite, access to electricity is quite high, but we do have a few low ones. Papua New Guinea, the utility there is PPL, Solomon Islands, and UNELCO in Vanuatu are the low ones, as the ambassador mentioned in his opening address. These are all the utilities for the different countries, but SCE is a St. Carolina in of California. They've become part of our benchmarking team countries. Now, the case for Nauru, I just want to quickly outline Nauru. I was the chief executive until the end of last year, so I'm working from data, actually real data collected here. Just before the, in June last year, the oil price was such that the component for 1 kilowatt hour, the expense component for 1 kilowatt hour of electricity was around 36 cents. That's just for fuel and oil. Does not include maintenance of the diesel generators. It does not include any capacity costs or financial costs associated with that. Purely fuel and oil, it's 36 cents, and I'm talking in Australian dollars per kilowatt hour. We have a solar rooftop feed-in tariff of around 20 cents Australian per kilowatt hour. And payback is around 2 to 3 years for solar, people who have put in solar. So it's becoming more and more people are installing solar on their rooftop solar on their houses. The advantage, the remoteness of the country, of the island makes diesel energy alternative more and more expensive, and that gives you the opportunity to, it makes solar panel plants more economic, more things. So many people don't realize this. that you can get a higher price for your IPPs, higher price for your solar plant if you do install them in the small islands. So the challenges we face, this fossil fuel is a high component, but islands are working aggressively to replace that. High cost of fuel, land is scarce. I mean, you small islands, finding land, one hectare per kilowatt hour of solar is not easy. And so floating solar and becomes attractive, especially those with lagoons. There's long, thin supply chain, lack of engineering expertise. And the next challenge that's coming upon us is immobility. I mean, the grid's got to be made ready for that transition of land transport energy onto the grids. So issues, remote islands, it's not easy to source solar panels. I think finance. I mentioned finance now, and there's a lot of, it's not as easy in the remote countries like Nauru. I mean, they just have a bank that doesn't loan, it's just processing transactions, etc. But I also see there's a lot of donors in countries that are in trying to find ways of making finance available. Currently, to mention, I'm on a team that's designing facilities for SIDS in the Pacific, Caribbean, and Indian Ocean. This is from the Coalition of Disaster Resilience Infrastructure, of which renewable energy is one of them. It's co-chaired by the UK and India. And we're hired by DFAT Australia to try and design the facility so that financing can be made available and easier. And we're still in the process of doing that. So anyway, that's just a short summary. I hope it has helped you. Thank you.
Thank you, Abraham. That was amazing. I think one point that you mentioned that I just wanted to make sure hit home to everyone. So you mentioned that in July 2020, that in Nauru, the cost of just the fuel and oil component was 27 cents per kilowatt hour in Australian dollars. And to convert that for some people who may just be more familiar with the US dollar cost, that's about 20, sorry, I wrote that incorrectly. It's 27 cents per kilowatt hour in the US dollar, which means that for the US, typically your residential rate for your electricity is about 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour, and the average in most Caribbean countries is about 2 to 3 times that, and that's what they were paying in Nauru just for the fuel and oil components. So that was really eye-opening to note. So that brings us to the end of our introductory remarks from all of our panelists, and we have a host of questions from our audience. So to begin, we actually have a question specifically for Alexi from Terry Higarty, who asks, does EDF Renewables recognize island communities merely as potential customers or more so as stakeholding partners in renewable energy projects? And how might this partnership work in practice?
Thank you very much for this question. One thing is very important to have in mind is that we never develop huge projects alone. We are always looking for a partner, usually for a 50-50 equity partnership. And we always try to work with the local partner. We obviously need local partner. EDF is a French-based company, and Pacific is far away. So we need for sure local resources. It's maybe easier for us in the Caribbean because we have several French islands in the Caribbean. But anyway, even in the Caribbean area, we need a local partner.
Awesome, thank you. And then since we have you on camera, we might as well give you one more question before we turn it over to another panelist. So what percentage of renewables does EDF currently achieve? They appreciated the 100% by 2030 target, but more so, where are we at today?
The average is around 30%. We have some islands very close to the 100%. It's the target has been decided very recently, so the challenge is there, but we are on our way, and I think it could be maybe it may be easier to go quicker on another island than in the French one. I'm sure we can achieve 80-90% of renewable energy on other islands before we get these figures in France, in French island.
Thank you so much. So thinking about, and this question is for any of our panelists who would like to take it. Can you point to any specific examples or case studies where microgrid deployment sped up the recovery post-disaster relative to the more traditional systems? Or any other metrics that are similar in making the argument for renewable microgrids?
I don't know if the question was for me, but maybe I can share an information here for area with climatic risk. EDF has developed containerized microgrid solution that this is for small needs for communities, for example. And the interest, one of the interests of this solution is that if you know that there will be a climatic disaster, you can just put the solar panel in the container. It's very easy. You just need 2 hours to do that. I can show you just one slide. If you have 1 minute up. I don't know if you can see my screen here up.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Yeah, you can see the screen. So,
yeah.
Okay, the name of the subsidiary is Ecosyn Innovation. So they have developed several solutions. And one solution, as you can see there, can be you just need 2 hours to develop the solution on site. I can send a link to see a video for everyone on the chat.
That would be appreciated. Thank you so much. And to take you out of the hot seat, we're going to turn over to Mr. Abraham. So there's a question from the audience where, is it possible to implement waste to energy as an option to generate electricity and at the same time manage the domestic waste? So I think they're wanting to know whether or not we could use waste to energy as part of the microgrid renewables sustainable energy transition.
Yeah, that's always a possibility, but from my knowledge in my experience in Nauru, that was investigated, but it does supply us. The potential is small though, because the waste is not as the volume of waste is not as large, but it is a possibility. But yeah, the potential is low comparatively for the grid.
In the same vein, this question, though, speaks more to the need for large land masses in regards to using solar panels for your microgrids. So they're asking in islands, since land is limited, is there a plan to shift to hydro instead?
Is there a plan to shift to, what did you say?
Oh, I'm
I
sorry,
missed that word.
hydro. There's an
Hydro.
ask about the role of hydro in renewable microgrids.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, land is there's limited land. One of the things they're looking at is floating solar, especially island groups where there's a lagoon. Concerning hydro, we did investigate having a hydro on Nauru. And the idea was to use seawater. So if we had excess solar panel, we'd use it as storage. It's a pump hydro storage idea. And you use your solar to pump up the seawater during the day and drain it during the night. We did have a report done on it. There was a report done on it because a lot of islands, we don't have surface water resources, no rivers, but they do have a lot of seawater around. So it was investigated. Of course, that would be coupled with your solar panel investment, and that's still something that is an option. It was considered by the New Zealand government. They would be interested in looking more into it. They did the feasibility for us. Yeah.
Awesome.
But then again, the hydro is limited because many of the atolls, they're just flat, highly, you need them. Whereas Nauru, we had the highest point is about 40 meters above sea level. Yeah.
Understood. There are a couple questions for you, but we're going to shift first to Dr. Burton. I like having this switch of the hot seat. So Dr. Burton, over to you. The question speaks about the experiences of Caribbean islands with microgrids. I know you mentioned in your earlier remarks the success of a few cases. If you could perhaps go into greater detail with the successful rollouts of renewable microgrids in the Caribbean.
Thank you, Azel. I think one of the areas that we would want to emphasize is that the regulatory framework and landscape that is required for the even greater rollout of microgrids is something that the CARILEC Secretariat, in collaboration with OCA and the CARICOM Secretariat, has been actively pursuing. So while we have some success at the technical level in terms of deployment of microgrids, what we'd like to see is the increased penetration of renewable energy through microgrids as a policy measure and not necessarily as an ad hoc initiatives that are happening somewhat sporadically. So while one can point to some level of success in terms of penetration, from CARILEC's standpoint, we are more interested in a more coordinated, systematic approach to the idea of adoption of renewable energy through microgrids. And that is because of the complexity of interconnection with the main grids, while obviously we are aware that there would be island grids where they are off-grid in totality. And we appreciate that there is some usefulness in that approach. But the fact is, we know that there, in most cases, would have to be an interconnection with the main grid operating on an island or territory. And in particular, where we have critical infrastructure, whether it's hospitals, law enforcement agencies, social services, to increase the resilience at the community level, we think that regulatory frameworks that facilitate clear and transparent rules of engagement regarding export of excess energy back to the grid, remuneration parameters, net metering and net billing regimes, for example, are areas that we would like to see further advancement in. And we have just, as I mentioned before, articulated some of our positions in this regard in two policy papers on policy and energy transition and regulation and energy transition that we're presently working through a consultative process with our various regional stakeholders, OCA, the Association of Caribbean Utility Regulators, the CARICOM Policy Unit, CCRE, the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, and even VIS is located in Belize. So we believe that a consultative approach to regulatory reform is a necessary, not necessarily precursor, but should come in tandem with the rollout of microgrids in the region. So technologically, yes, the technology is there. We could see a few successful deployments of it, but in terms of a significant shift and the transition that we are seeking, in light of some of the ambitious targets that have been set, we believe that we'll not get there with a sporadic ad hoc approach to the deployment of microgrids and the adoption of renewable energy in the Caribbean.
Thank you for that thorough response, Dr. Burton. Regulation is a huge part of the solution for many utilities, but oftentimes there is a disconnect between what the utility views as necessary regulation and important regulation and what your government and other stakeholders may view as the necessary enabling regulation for this transition. So I would be really intrigued to hear your thoughts on that, and also to bring in Nicolasi as a utility leader to hear your viewpoints.
So if I may just briefly, it's interesting that we are at pains to say this. We really try to approach this discussion as we all come to the table with slightly different perspectives, but there's actually more overlap than we think. So for example, in the membership of CARILEC, 60% of our members are actually majority government owned. So it's not really a case of private versus public sector. We have 19, 20 of our 32 utilities that are government owned, meaning that they set the policy, they install the board of directors of these companies, they approve the targets and the mandates in a broad way, obviously not operationally. But the point is, it's these same governments that set targets, right? And who are trusted with the legislative apparatus to put in place the regulatory mechanism. So, and incidentally, we have found though that some of the utilities that have been most successful in innovative approaches to adopting renewable energy technologies are actually not well correlated with the government-owned utilities. So the point is, it's not a case of big bad utilities in the way of reform, and governments are pushing for that reform, because again, what we're finding is that the lack or the slow uptake of the legislative regulatory mechanisms and policies to usher in that new dispensation that we all seek are actually in the hands of the governments, right? There's no strong private lobby. There's no, we don't have any paid lobbyists on staff who seek to influence government policy and block such legislation in the corridors of power. That's not quite the case, at least not in this region for the most part. And so what we are seeking is an informed, evidence-based approach to that transitioning. And sometimes, for example, you hear well-meaning policymakers make statements like, you know, the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, so we could go renewable energy. What's the big, you know, and we all know it's not as simple as that, right? There are technical and environmental and policy regulatory mechanisms that have to be in place to facilitate that transition. It's not because the sun is shining and the wind is blowing that, you know, we could go RE 100% in 5 years. So it takes some level of education, some level of capacity building in terms of evidence-based policy making, hence the reference, constant reference to IRRPs. So we make evidence-based, well-informed decisions as to the mix of RE technologies that ought to fuel, for want of a better word, that energy transition that we seek. And rest assured, Carolex renewed and repositioned strategic approach is that we are embracing that change and we are on board with the regulatory reforms. We are constantly engaged in roundtables with OCA and the Carolex.
Dr. Britton, you accidentally muted yourself.
Yes, thank you. I was ending anyway. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicolasi or Abraham, do you
if I
have
could
any?
actually also.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments, and I just wanted to say that I think from a utilities perspective, just as has been rightly pointed out by Dr. Bertin here, is that my perspective at least is that we are trying to connect that governance level through to the operational level, and healthy conversations with the regulators and the policy setters is something that we focus tremendously on. I think there are some prerequisites that need to be considered as well in terms of empowering of those utilities to be able to differentiate the operational from the strategic, and those conversations, like I mentioned before, the cultural changes that need to be considered by the regulations and the institutional setups. But in saying that, healthy conversations are really, really vital with the regulator and being able to ensure that those changes happen. And I also appreciate the fact that there is a holistic approach and the role that the associations, either in the Pacific or the Caribbean, play in terms of trying to standardize and bring a lot of learning from various environments together to be able to come up with consolidated and evidence-based process for establishing regulations. Like I mentioned, I think our role here, and we kind of also need a bit of empowerment to do it, is to provide that evidence through to the regulation setters and making sure that they know the actual true status quo so that we can have a good conversation on the way forward. There are numerous challenges, there are numerous changes to be implemented, and healthy conversations are very, very much important in ensuring that those transitions happen. If you don't mind, Islan, I'm going to pull it back just a short step there with regards to the microgrids and it's a kind of and the climatic events and how microgrids have actually assisted there. I think from our experience here in Tonga is that we have, as part of the holistic approach to implementing these microgrids, a lot of the distribution assets have been highly neglected as well, particularly in Tonga's context. So the transition that we have been actually going through to implementation of microgrids has also incorporated the need to reinvigorate and reestablish those assets to a level that are sustainable per se. And that has actually assisted a lot in being able to manage the impacts of microgrids and help us to recover a lot faster, particularly from tropical cyclones, which we have regular instances of here in the Kingdom of Tonga. So I think not specifically the generation portion, I think in terms of trying to design and build back better if there are any damages from climatic events, that's really assisted a lot in managing the impacts of climate events. But because of the holistic approach that should be taken, better assets in terms of the distribution and the grid have been established, which also allows us to recover a lot faster from renewable energy, from climatic events, and to also make sure that the renewable energy that's introduced is done and is able to be distributed in a sustainable manner. So I just wanted to also pick up on that point that was being raised earlier. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicolasi. Abram, do you have anything to add surrounding this topic?
No, I think we should just try and deal with more questions. I think what Nicolasi said is good.
Awesome. Our next question is actually for you. And they would like to understand more of how do microgrids, I guess, work in rural areas, to paraphrase their question slightly.
Oh. Well, it's a challenge in rural areas. First, the technology, the knowledge and skills. However, in rural areas, take solar, for instance. Solar is now becoming more and more in kit form. You can easily install solar if you know how to follow instructions. Maintenance. And with the batteries, I think that's become more and more easier to install and operate. I'm not sure what the question is all about, how. I think in rural forms, it's become more and more economic. I mean, the alternative of using fossil fuel is too expensive. As I showed in my slide to Nauru, it's become, there was a stage when solar was more expensive, but now it's almost like you've got to do it. Similar if you do have wind resources, and hope other technologies in renewable become more and more economic.
Yeah, certainly.
But in remote islands, the economics of using solar as opposed to putting in a small diesel engine is just so favorable now. It's very favorable.
Certainly, as the technology continues to advance and renewables become more and more competitive, it's definitely economic. Like, it makes economic sense to have a greater penetration of renewables in our grids and our microgrids. So thank you for highlighting that point. There are we have a lot of questions that are left open, so I'm going to start just grouping them slightly. And this one will go to Alexis. Does EDF do social projects or social microgrids where they support smaller islands with low to no budget? And then also, given the increasing intensity of natural disasters and islands, how are the microgrid developments able to better respond to damages?
For sure, as we need to invest on a very long term, from 15 to 20, sometimes to 30 years, we need to have some financial guarantee. We have the technical solution, we have all the technical skills, but we need to be paid during the few decades of the project. We obviously face the difficulties for the project to be to find an insurance if there is too many climatic disaster in the area, as everyone. But this is something we are used to deal with, and as EDF is a huge group, I think it's easier for us to convince the insurance, as we will use the best solution to avoid not every damages, but most of the damages. I hope it's answer you. Yeah, I'm answering your question. Sorry.
So the first part of that question was, if EDF is doing any work on islands where there's a no to low budget, and what does that partnership look like? And then secondly, the question was just surrounding how can we make these microgrids more resistant to the damages that can occur with the increasing intensity of our climate change impacts?
And for the small communities and with no budget, as I said earlier, we can also sell a containerized solution, and it's with a budget of 1 or 2 years of operating cost of diesel engine, they will afford a solar plus battery solution and have electricity for free during more than 15 years. This is something we can do. But for very large power purchase agreements, as I said, we need to have strong counterparts. So we are dealing with the World Bank, with ADB, with other big institution to get this guarantee, and we never develop the project alone. As I said, we have the ability to get all the stakeholders sponsoring the project with us, and this is our strongness as a huge power utility. We can convince many stakeholders to take part of a huge project.
Thank you so much, Alexi. So given there's one more question that I think would be a great question for you to answer, but specifically looking at this idea of circularity and the circular economy, there's questions surrounding what are the plans for islands with microgrids that use solar panels and the batteries. How can we increase our utilization of increase rather the promotion of the circular economy idea?
This is for me, the question?
You can feel free to take it, or if you would like me to put someone else in the hot seat, I can do that.
I want to share the mic.
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Burton or Abraham or Nicolasi, would any of you care to comment on this idea of circular economy and its connection to renewable microgrids?
Absolutely, I'll give it a go, Nazelle, here from the Kingdom of Tonga. I mean, I think each microgrid is going to be different. I think there's a lot that needs to go back to first principles in considering the resources that are available and how they can be incorporated into a circular economy system. Tonga is quite blessed with very rich and fertile soil. And so we have been investigating for a few years now the opportunity for biogas or biomass-based a circular economy. But certainly there is a lot of benefits as well that can be considered from a circular economy approach, and ensuring that every single stage of the process has an economic benefit as well as a sustainable benefit for the country. But like I said, I think it does come back a lot to considering what natural resources available and what could be utilized for that circular approach. Here in the Kingdom, like I said, we're focused heavily on looking at agriculture and any means of increasing our agricultural independence as well, and not just our energy independence as a kingdom. And that being also a microgrid in a way for the agricultural side of things. So yeah, I think it's very different for each island, but that's kind of where we are at the moment in terms of circular economy approach to introduction of microgrids.
Yeah, so if I may just compliment Nicolasi's answer, which we fully concur with. And it speaks to the point that we made earlier about the approaches being evidence-based. So while the circular economy presents an opportunity, conceptually, philosophically, we subscribe to it, its application needs to be relevant to the jurisdiction in question, given the resource base. So if we're talking circular economy as in biogas, we need to look at what is the capacity of that region or that territory to generate sufficient output to sustain a microgrid deployment based on biofuel, biogas, etc. And so it's a philosophical type question, but the answer and application, we believe, needs to be evidence-based and practical. And again, for the umpteenth time, we say IRPs, integrated resource plans, modeling, so we get that precise mix of RE technologies that make sense for each specific jurisdiction, as opposed to being driven purely by a philosophical, conceptual approach, which is necessary to guide the decision making. But in terms of the choices and the relative input of the various RE technologies that would inform microgrid deployment or other such deployments, it has to be, we believe, evidence-based at every stage of the implementation. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicolasi and Dr. Burton. So we are swiftly coming to the end of our time, though we have so many questions left unanswered. So what I would like to take these last few minutes to do is to actually give each of you an opportunity to give a 1-minute nugget or key takeaway that you would like all of our attendees here today to leave this session with. If you had 1 minute to share anything about the promotion of renewable microgrids and its role in a sustainable energy transition for islands, what would it be? And we can start off with Dr. Burton, since we already have you on screen.
Okay, thank you, Zell. I will just refer to a little snippet from our position paper on regulation and renewable energy so that I remain concise within the time allocated. Otherwise, I might ramble on a bit too much. And what we have stated in that position paper is that for small-scale renewable energy, we believe regulation should be in place that allows customers to use and interconnect these systems to the main grid, accounting for technical considerations. So we believe households, citizens, enterprises should be able to generate part or all of the electricity needs from their own small-scale RE-based power plant while using the distributed grid to inject excess production and to withdraw electricity when self-production is not sufficient to meet their own needs. So we're basically talking microgrids, right? We believe that the compensation for injected electricity should not exceed the avoided cost. And I saw a question in the Q&A about net billing versus net metering. So that's sort of answering it as well. So the compensation for injected electricity should not exceed the avoided cost per kilowatt hour, typically the energy component of the retail price, without levies, taxes, and additional charges on grid use and measurement. So we're more leaning towards net billing versus net metering, right? And a viable grid service fee, we believe, should be allocated that reflects the utility cost of providing the grid services to such customers. We don't believe in free rides, and, and that the tariff regulation will need to properly reflect this requirement through the introduction of a net billing mechanism. So these are my parting words.
Thank you, Dr. Burton. And Nicolasi, would you like to go next?
Thanks very much, Azelle. Yeah, I guess my nugget of summary or key takeaway here is just, or again, re-emphasizing the cultural change that utilities are expected in some degree to implement, and to also take that into context, and the fact that continual and strong dialogue with all the key stakeholders is essential in that ability to affect that change and the strategic transformation that's required. The digitization aspect is an ongoing challenge as well, particularly for small island states, and ensuring that the critical and key resources are up to speed with the digitization of all of these changes. At the end of the day, as Dr. Burton has emphasized, it's difficult to try and manage the concept at the customer interface of the idea of a free ride when we introduce renewable, what are perceived to be free energy sources. And that's an ongoing challenge that needs to be considered as well at the policy and the governance level when discussing these. And therefore, it's very important that the dialogue and that the key messaging and the approach from the whole of the industry is consolidated and very, very strong when it comes to those aspects. And hopefully, if everything goes well, a service-based approach rather than a commodity-based approach will eventuate in terms of majority of the utilities as we move towards these more microgrid-based approaches in islands. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Abraham?
Okay, thank you. I think my last message would be in the Pacific Islands, governments are pursuing a replacement of aggressively pursuing a replacement of fossil fuel energy with renewables. And in the small islands, there are opportunities for people to participate who have the knowledge, finance, and are willing and have the will to do it. The Pacific Islands themselves, they recognize the issue, the problem, so microgrid will fulfill a key niche in their strategy to replace fossil fuel. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Alexi.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say that I was very happy to have a talk with all the panelists, and I will be very happy to have personal talk after the session. Every case is different. My team is available to make a study of your grid, your need. As I said, every case is different, but we have all the technical skills. I will be very happy to facilitate energy transition in the Pacific Island, in the Caribbean. And I think it's urgent to, we have to act quickly if we want to achieve the 2025, even the 2030 targets. And as the price of solar panel and battery has dropped so much in the last few years, I really think that the more we wait and the more money a lot of countries are losing, because you could enjoy a lower price of electricity with hybrid solutions, solar plus battery. And you have my email in the presentation. I have shared the email also in the chat. Do not hesitate to send me a message. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our expert panelists for joining us today. We certainly appreciated your wisdom throughout this entire session, and will take away your nuggets of wisdom at the end. Thank you again to EDF Renewables for serving as a sponsor for this session. We are very grateful for your sponsorship, and we thank you so much for allowing us to have this space to have such an important conversation, because as all of our panelists have said today, and especially even in our chat and our poll that we had earlier, we all recognize that renewable microgrids play an integral role in this sustainable energy transition for small islands. And we recognize that the time to act is certainly now. So in order for us to continue these and have these conversations where we can share our solutions, share our ideas, it's so important, and we are so thankful. Noting that we are a few minutes behind time, please do join EDF at their booth, check them out, and again, come back for all of our other sessions with more amazing expert panelists from across the world. We appreciate you. Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience.
Thank you, Azel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Azel. Great job.
Thank you.